Good evening, everybody. Hello, Valia. I think we can start.
Great, great. Good evening from me as well, and welcome. I'm Valia Fragkou. I'm a philanthropy advisor. It is a great pleasure to be here today to discuss the very impactful collaboration, the very impactful relationship between philanthropy and culture in the Greek context with Sotiris Petropoulos, the co-founder of an organization called HIGS, which offers a variety of services, of capacity building services to Greek nonprofits. For our discussion today, we will be focusing on institutional philanthropy and more specifically charitable foundations as well as other grant-making philanthropic institutions. Of course, individual donors who also exist in abundance usually follow the trends, the grant-making philanthropy priorities that are set by foundations and these other grant-making entities. And for the cultural sector, we will be looking at nonprofits, two kinds, nonprofits which are cultural per se, as well as organizations that belong in other fields and areas, but they choose consciously to implement programs of cultural elements. These two types of nonprofits are put together for us to define the cultural sector. So in order to start off, I would like to ask you, Sotiri, for your observation of the Greek civil society part that focuses on the cultural sector.
Many thanks, Valia, and good evening to everybody. So my view on this cultural sector of the NGO ecosystem, in Greece at least, what we see is a quite young, developing segment part of the Greek non-profit ecosystem, where we have at least three very specific groups of organizations. So we have the most traditional ones, let's say, for example, museums or arts organizations. Then we have a new recent trend of newly established organizations that they are around arts and they're quite innovative. And then we have also a more traditional segment of the Greek civil society that is nonprofits that they're working around social or health issues, but they are gradually been introducing in their activities a lot of dimensions of the cultural economy and the cultural world so that they bring about better effects on what they're doing. So definitely we have these three. We have an overall ecosystem that it has a bit of a dynamism, but on the other hand, it is also struggling to balance in a quite flux environment in which it operates. Now, if we want to compare this ecosystem to more developed ones, if you like for example, the ones that we see across Western Europe and North America, then we would say that we are on our baby steps. And partially this is also connected to the fact that we haven't seen the promise of the cultural dimension of the nonprofit sector to be materialized. Partially also because I don't think that we really have as a society understood the value of that and all the prospects. And I think partially this can also be viewed through the other side of the ecosystem, so donors, for example. I don't know what you think about that.
Your thoughts are true. The Greek institutional philanthropy gives approximately 15% of its grants money. And this is also a percentage that applies for cultural-related projects, which means that out of all the grants that are being made on a yearly basis, only 15% goes to cultural-related. This is a small percentage, an investment in culture that falls behind European counterparts. But in order to understand the country-specific characteristics, I will walk you through the two crises that have taken place during the last 12 years. Starting off with the socioeconomic crisis, among philanthropists, among institutional philanthropy, we saw at the beginning of the crisis a prioritization among social welfare primarily, and then health. So the rising social needs drove the prioritization, the agenda of philanthropists towards social welfare and health, which is more of an alleviation approach, a humanitarian approach. Towards the second part of the 10-year socioeconomic crisis, we saw a slight shift from this alleviation approach towards a more developmental one. And we thus started seeing more grants, mostly for education. A second theme that also became popular was that of entrepreneurship. This is mainly because after the brain, in the process of brain regain that became very important in order to attract back to Greece Greeks that had left the previous years. Motives had to be created for them to come back and stay in Greece. So again, this shift that was more of developmental nature was firstly in education and secondly in entrepreneurship. Culture started coming along, but as a second priority. So this shift had primarily other sectors, and culture was falling behind. This same sequence of prioritizations also took place during the pandemic crisis. When the pandemic struck a year ago, last March, again, most philanthropists, most funders started first directing grants towards the health system and secondarily under social welfare. It's only until very recently that we have left again this alleviation approach to enter the developmental, and again, education is gaining more attention than culture. Culture is seen as second, as less important during this crisis. And as you can see, when a crisis takes place, we have the same circle of priorities. Of course, during the pandemic, it's a much quicker pace, but certainly culture is not a top priority for funders during a crisis. What have you observed through your experience happening as far as priority or as far as movement trends within the civil society part related to culture?
Okay, first of all, may I say that I really do agree with what you actually explained to us, because and it is amazing how this pattern of responding to different crises replicates itself again and again. And I need to stress once more that it is partly connected with the value that we don't see in the cultural dimension of society and as well of the Greek civil society. Now, regarding what we see in non-profits, it was discussed also in the previous panel about how reinventing themselves, understanding a new business model, and trying to fit in a new environment that it needs for you to be more proactive, more innovative, etc. And we see a lot of instances of such activities from a variety of organizations. Now, having been exposed to more than 300 or more nonprofits across Greece, some of which are actually focused on the on the cultural side, I may say that we see a lot of organizations that can be described as cultural ones that have been really on the verge of social innovation. I discussed these three subgroups, so just let me give you 1, 2, or 3 maybe examples. Let's start with the more traditional ones. So, for example, museums. As I was a kid, I was always thinking of museums as these a bit boring, not very interactive places where, okay, you would see the exhibition, but that was it. And now you see we have organizations such as the Cycladic Museum, where you see a lot of interaction. They have put things on the digital, online, and they are supporting and they are providing access to a variety of people, a lot of whom are related to vulnerable groups. And this is a second thing that we see also. And this is actually part of the mission of the nonprofits, to be honest. So they are trying to give access, to provide diversity, to bring about the positive things that we can see on the cultural side, on arts, to the most vulnerable people. And one, may I say, positive thing, if we can find a positive thing from the the pandemic crisis that we have seen the last couple of months, is that these vulnerabilities have actually been exposed even more. So we have seen organizations such as, for example, the Eyes of Light or Liminal. They're two quite recent young organizations, and they are focusing on enhancing diversity, enhancing access to culture on the one hand, because they see the value of people participating in all that. And second of all, if I can isolate to just the Eyes of Light, what they do is that they try to support psychologically people that they're patients of any disease, but particularly cancer, and they have been much affected psychologically due to all this crisis and the lockdown through the use of arts and specifically of photography. So I see a lot of social innovation, and I see that we have a quite dynamic part of the cultural organizations there. So it is quite interesting and very, very promising, to be honest.
Great. An example of social innovation from the part of a nonprofit under, of course, the thematic of culture that drove to a very dynamic relationship between funder and nonprofit, grantee and grantor, that I can also share with you. It was a collaboration that became a win-win for both participants in this collaboration. The example is the cultural nonprofit 7-Eleven implementing a recreational program titled Thalo. Thalo is a recreational program that targets care homes. It has also mental strengthening elements. At the beginning of last year, they had applied for a program extension to visit more care homes within the Attica region. And as soon as the pandemic crisis started appearing more in Asia and Europe and then in Greece, they are proactive, so they started designing a new business model for how to proceed. So the conversations they had with the funders fell under the possibility of a change in this business model. So they decided to use digitalization as a method to address the period of the pandemic. And through this social innovation, they were able to integrate technology, and the funder was convinced. So the grant changed completely by the proactiveness of the cultural organization. And it also presented two opportunities. One of them was to go to care homes throughout Greece, in the Greek province, and at the same time offering services at home to elderly beneficiaries of the Thalo program. So here we see an opportunity that started from the pandemic by a cultural organization that was very proactive and adaptive. Now, overall and going forward, some of the things that I see happening, especially in the relationship between nonprofits and funders, is the fact that organizations are the ones that are in the field. So in a way, organizations are the foundation's eyes and ears. And by increasing the amount of social programs that have a cultural vehicle, a cultural element in it, they become socially innovative. And the very fact that culture is now integrated in social programs means that culture is becoming, it is a catalyst for social change and advancement. This is a very important trend that is embraced by nonprofit organizations, and also it is a way of integration into making the society more inclusive and more cohesive. This was also apparent in the many nowadays integrational programs for migrants that have a cultural element, a cultural undertone. Lastly, what I would like to mention is that culture is a social glue. This is a message that nonprofits embrace. This is a message for which they become ambassadors, and sooner or later, foundations will also see this as a driver. That's what I foresee in the future. What do you see as happening in the next few years?
Okay, so first of all, let me stress that I am a quite optimistic person. So this means that I see and I try to understand the trends in a rather positive way. And I see a lot of opportunities being there. So we have a lot of organizations that have been transforming themselves, which is a positive thing, and they're actually a bit being forced, of course, due to the pandemic, but as you mentioned, they're using this digitalization, like the organization you mentioned, 7-Eleven, in order to enhance their reach. And this means that we are not just focusing on the main urban areas, like, for example, Athens or Thessaloniki, but we are spreading across the entire country and the periphery of Greece, where there are a lot of needs also there. So this is one thing. And by using this presence online that we have already seen also in activities such as e-fundraising, where we have seen a lot of organizations joining up with arts organizations in order to offer a theater, a theatrical play, some music, dance lessons, even yoga or other expressions and parts of the arts. We see that we are discovering the value of culture and how cultural dimensions, aspects of human activity can really enhance the way that nonprofits are working and are operating. And if you go into that, and then where are we focusing as a country now? We are focusing on achieving high levels of economic development, not just growth, but of development, because we are seeing all these opportunities after the crisis actually gradually leaving us, and we are talking about a period of at least 10 and more years of being in a constant, very peculiar and difficult environment. So what we can do there is that culture can be an engine, not just of supporting the vulnerable, which is a plus, but we can also see the value addition of utilizing the cultural heritage and all the social innovation that we are witnessing for more employment positions, a more healthy environment, supporting psychologically different kinds of people and things like that. So to be honest, I'm a quite optimist on all that, and think that we'll have a positive future.
It's striking how you mentioned psychology, because nowadays psychological issues have really merged, mental health issues have really merged, and of course culture for these types of needs, as well as all social needs, can provide solution and be a vehicle for the various social solutions. So this is the driver. And you have seen nonprofits also becoming more collectively working together and collaborating to create joint culture projects. This is true, right?
Yes, definitely, and this collaboration part is part of what actually gives me an understanding of that we will have a quite positive future. So yes. I think, thank you very much. I think that we are closing with a rather positive notion of what can happen in the cultural economy.